Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me on our presentation on inventory metrics today. On our agenda, the first item is how do we get a copy of the inventory metrics that we are going to use in this presentation? Inventory metrics, what exactly are they? Understanding what the metrics mean, understanding what the content is saying to us, especially when we match it against data, and in our software spotlight, we're going to identify a few key business issues when we look at some of the reports that are going to be explained later in the part of the presentation. And lastly, we'll have a question and answer session. Let's first start with the data platform and analytics. Zap Data Hub serves as the underlying data platform. It provides the connectivity, the integration, and also the smarts to translate technical terms and numbers into English language. What that means for us is that we worry less about technical field names and numeric codes, as these get translated into English meanings and captions. Data Hub gets installed with a model which understands the structure of your base ERP, and just within a matter of days, converts that into a data warehouse and multi-dimensional layer to connect your visual sources to. Zap Data Hub also provides three major aspects of business reporting. It's able to do data modeling, perform web visualizations, and distribution. For distribution, Zap Data Hub is able to schedule reports, evaluate data-driven events, and email out one or many emails as well as their attachments. Zap Data Hub then supports other visualization tools through the provision of data in our data warehouse, which can comprise of tables from the ERP as well as a gamut of other data sources. So now let's get started. Knowing about Zap's data model pre-packaged analytics offering. In the middle of the screenshot, you will see an ERP model. If you go down the list, we first start with the data sources. These are the data sources that get combined into this ERP model. Each data source has various tables which are converted to pipelines, and the pipelines are related to one another. There are process configurations which will determine the freshness of your data. There are database scripts which serve to augment your data by doing cleaning and transformation. Parameters are able to be set against various pipelines. Rows, modules, reporting calculations are to manage permissions. Now on the left panel, you will see a couple of subfolders under my ERP folder. As an example, in SAP Business One, the data set that I'm using today, we have 5 subfolders, one for finance, inventory, manufacturing, procurement, and sales. Since our content is about inventory today, if I expand inventory, there'll be subject areas like aging, days of supply, on hand, turnover, valuation. If I expand that another level, I would see the analytics beneath that. For example, the inventory aging analysis report, slow moving inventory analysis report, or maybe the on hand inventory report. If you are keen on Power BI content, Zap also provides you an option to download specific content depending on the smart connectors in your package. Go to app.powerbi.com, log in, and you'll be able to just pick up the apps from the app icon. So if you click on that, it gives you a variety of different apps that you could download. Do a search for Zap and look into inventory analytics. Click on that to download it onto your local machine. Now, our main objective today is to put some analysis together to see what's the situation based on some data that's going to be reported in the later part of this presentation. Let's first know what our metrics are before we start doing this analysis. So we are going to understand what inventory metrics mean. We are going to look at the company's Power BI content and get our bearings on what has been set up. And let's find out the true stock health of the company. Once we install the content and looking at inventory, I'm presented with 5 working dashboards. Just by looking at the screen capture, you can see very clearly that there are 5 metrics. There's stock valuation dollars, there's on-hand quantity, There's average inventory days of supply, inventory turn, and days in inventory. And that's the first out of the five dashboards that we have in Power BI. Let's first take a look at these definitions. Stock valuation. Stock valuation is to determine the intrinsic value of a stock or the theoretical value of that stock, which is not attached to its prevailing price. This determines whether the stock is over or undervalued against its current market price. On-hand quantities are the number of items in your warehouse right now. It's not to be confused with available quantities, which are stocks in your warehouse which already may have been committed to others on a sales order, or perhaps it's been reserved as a component, or in certain cases, it may include orders that are in transit. So very different what available quantities are with on-hand quantities. Other calculations are the inventory days of supply, which is computed as average total inventories divided by the cost of goods sold in one day. Knowing these days of supply just helps us to ensure that we place orders in the event that the stocks run short, and we go ahead to clear stock if it's in an oversupply state. Keeping more inventory means more costs, so we need to preserve a delicate balance between availability and cost dollars. How many days your current inventory will last is really based on your sales levels. So if you've got fast moving stock, you want to make sure you have enough inventory in stock as compared to a slow moving good. Inventory turn. I've got an example here with regards to inventory turn, which will help explain the formula a little bit better. So if we add inventory on hand at the start of the year to inventory on hand at the end of the year and divide it by 2, we'll find the company's average inventory. So for example, if you started the year with 300,000 in inventory and ended with 200,000, the average inventory will be 500,000 divided by 2. That gives us 250,000. We then divide the company's cost of goods sold for the year by the average inventory to get the company's inventory turn per year. So to translate as an example, if the company has a cost of $1 million for cost of goods sold, we divide that by 250,000, which we've computed above as the average inventory, we'll get 4 inventory turns per year. Now, the average days of supply is computed by dividing the annual cost of goods sold by the number of days per year to find the cost of goods sold per day. So in the same example, if we had $1 million in cost of goods sold, we divide it by 365, we'll get $2,740 as the average cost of goods per day. In the next part, we divide your inventory on hand by the inventory used per day to estimate average days of supply. So for example, we do know the closing balance of our inventory value was 200,000. We take that, divided by 2,740, and we have 73 average days of supply. Days in inventory. That is computed as the average total inventories divided by the cost of goods sold multiplied by 365. This is basically defined as the number of days inventory is held before it gets sold. Now the numerator we are familiar with is the average total inventories. The denominator, like the cost of sales and the 365, now in reality the 365 is multiplied against the ratio of this, represents the average per day cost being spent. Now the days in inventory specifies the days a company's cash is tied up in its inventory, so a smaller value is definitely preferred. A smaller number does indicate that a company is more efficiently and frequently selling off its inventory. However, a larger value may indicate that a company may be struggling with obsolete, high volume inventory and may have also invested a lot into those inventories. However, it may not always be the case. It could also be that the company is retaining high inventory levels in order to achieve high order fulfillment rates in anticipation of maybe larger sales in an upcoming holiday season. Or perhaps they are envisioning a spike in raw materials due to a foreseeable economic event. Let's look at the second dashboard in our Power BI content pack. Inventory valuation is the second dashboard, and it has details like the top 10 warehouses, top 10 item groups, and items. The stock value and on hand is plotted on the same graph in the bottom, and the inventory valuation is broken up by items here. The third one is inventory turnover. Straight away, we can see a few metrics here. You've got your turn ratios, you've got your average inventory valuation, which is computed as your average valuation divided by the average costs per day. In the reports, we see inventory turn details broken up by various items. So that can be seen here in this bubble chart, and it can also be seen at the bottom right where we have the data broken up by items. The fourth one is days of supply. There are two metrics. You have the average days of supply and the average daily sales cost. The reports show current stock and average daily sales cost in descending for higher supply and ascending for short supply. So you can see that here, out of stock is here, and the average daily sales cost chart is on the right. At the bottom, it has a few analysis for bubble charts as well as a broken down report against items. But we'll talk about that as we move along. And finally, we have the performance. You can see a metric there in days in inventory. And we have quite a bit of charts that indicate the issued versus the receipts, be it by a line graph, be it within a bar graph, or within bubble graphs. And again, you've got a table that indicates the same data but broken down by items. And now we move on to our software spotlight. Before we start on the software spotlight, just want to recap on what we've just covered. The capabilities are we can leverage free Power BI analytics on Microsoft App Source against your smart data connection. This presentation aims to allow us to understand KPIs and calculations in Power BI dashboards, especially the theoretical and academic formulas. We are going to identify key issues in the business in the next part of the presentation. And we're going to add a new table and build a report for inventory quantity in the third part of the presentation. So at this point, we are going to move on to the second part, and I'll see you in the next bit. Welcome to the second part of my presentation. Here I'm looking at Power BI content against my SAP Business One data source. The year is currently 2016 in my demonstration data, and the month is December. My stock valuation has a very small variance, so I'm not too concerned. The change in valuation is pretty small, but in the previous period it's actually very high. This tells me that October data may not be loaded correctly because between October and November, the variance is extremely high. In the average inventory days of supply, I can see that the total number of days is very high as well. This tells me that a lot of inventory is available to be sold and we're not moving it out of inventory fast enough. Inventory turn is very, very low. It's not even a feasible number. The higher the inventory turn, the better it is for us because it tells us that the stock is being sold a variety of number of times, hence the turn. So this value is definitely not good enough. The days in inventory just tells us how long the inventory has been sitting in the warehouse in terms of days. So this is an extremely high number as well. It just tells me that there's a lot of high value items just tying up cash in our inventory. As I look down, I look at all these other analytics and look at these bubbles. I do see one with the y-axis as on hand and the x-axis as stock valuation. So knowing that most of the on-hand items are at a lower value is at least better than having a lot of on-hand items at the high value. So as I can see here, a lot of the bubbles are congregating at the left side of the chart. In the second dashboard, we also look at valuation, which we've already seen in the previous dashboard, and the changes we've already noticed as well. Here we have the top 10 warehouses, top 10 item groups, top 10 items. We have a stock performance over time. And I did notice there was a big dip in February where stocks plunged. It could be a sellout, an acquisition by another firm, or a change in the system, followed by an accumulation of stock all the way through to December. The values of stocks are only in November and December, so it means that previously a lot of data for the total stock value may not have been loaded in the system. Looking at the inventory valuation analysis by item, I noticed that one product had a big surge in terms of valuation. So we'll probably have to investigate that a little bit more. Looking at the third dashboard, inventory turnover, we already knew that the inventory turn is very low. So if we look at this value here, now's the time to look into more detail. I'm just going to highlight that. And in Power BI, it specifies the calculation that's being used to power that formula. Going to take a look at the turnover, and that's the inventory turn ratio. Take a look at that formula, and here you see the formula for inventory turn is computed as the average inventory valuation and also a division of cost of goods sold divided by average inventory valuation. So what that means for a value to be very small, it means the denominator is very large. So our inventory valuation is very high, but our cost of goods sold is too small. If I look at the right as well, I notice that a lot of our items here, as it's broken out, has a very low inventory turn. That just tells us the massive amount of stock we hold on hand and the really dwindling and declining cost of sales, which is our sales position. In the fourth dashboard for inventory days of supply, I can see that we've already spoken about this before, where we have a high number of days of supply of all the items. Right here, we see the top 10 items, which shows the highest days of supply. So these are heavily overstocked. If we look at the top 10 items, those that are out of stock risk, we only have a few items that potentially might be out of stock. But after those three items, majority of them are high again. So this tells us that we've got too much stock in our warehouse. And in terms of the top 10 items, the highest sold item is only 357. And all of the numbers are pretty small. That tells us that our costs are really, really low. If our costs are low, our sales are low at the same time because it's cost of goods sold. If I look at the bubbles, one little bubble on the right side at least looks decent. And that is this particular product where we have an inventory days or supply of 86 days. Means that this product will run out in 86 days. Now, most of the other items, though, are on the left side where the cost on the x-axis indicates that they are very, very low daily sales costs, but yet the current valuation is still pretty high in the millions. So that tells us that the company is not really selling anything too much. On our last and final dashboard, this is showing the inventory performance dashboard. This shows movement in receipts and issues. We can see that the data started to drop in February but started to come up again in March. And according to the trend, the green line represents the receipt quantity. So the receipt quantity in terms of purchasing stopped in August, whereas the issue quantity just continued to move, even though the change is not very big at all. On the right, we see the same pattern, but in terms of the bar charts. So you see some movements in terms of stock, but then it has a long period of non-movement, and then followed by this is just the total value. Again, because this is issue and receipt quantity, if we look at the bubbles, I only see one product that has a high issue quantity based on the x-axis, and that is the JB Office Print 1420. And most of the other products are not having a high issue quantity at all, but instead it's pretty high on the receipt quantity. So obviously it means that the sales needs to pick up a whole lot more. So overall, just by looking at data and knowing what we know about valuation, turn, days of supply, we know that this company is grossly overstocked, and the details in these dashboards show by item how the things actually look. While a lot more investigation is required, it could very well be that some rules may need to be adjusted or even some of the data may not be properly loaded. But what's important is, and what the real question is, what do these contents look like when pointed to your data? In the next part of this presentation, we are going to be building some Power BI reports. So please join me in the next section as we open up a Power BI content page and start to pull in some data and tables to be added. In the third part of this presentation, I'll be creating a new Power BI report by first pulling tables from the existing data warehouse, linking them up, and ensuring that the measures and the fields are available so that I can create my new report. So what I'll first start with is to create a brand new report page. So I've got page 1 right there. The data that I'm looking for comes from an SAP B1 table called stocks in warehouse. I don't believe that's in my data model right now, and I'm just going to first add that in. So what I have to do is go into the relationships of the model and just look at how the inventory part of this content is strung up together. So you can see inventory transactions, transaction types, units, warehouses. That's what's currently used to build our content. I don't have stock in warehouse though, so I definitely have to add that as a new table. So I'll go to recent sources, and here I've set up these before because these were used to build the existing schema in the first place. So I'm just going to go to recent sources and give it some time for the tables to load. And it has already remembered all my credentials from when I first set up this part of the content. What I'm looking for is stock in warehouse, which should be somewhere at the bottom. This table right here. This table would contain my quantity on hand, my quantity committed, which are those that have been reserved, and my quantity on order, which are those that have been ordered. Just going to pick on that and do a load. So it's asking to import a direct query. I'm just going to take the default and say import. It's now pulling in that additional table into my schema. And there it is. I have a new one called stock in warehouse, which has all these data. And that's what I was looking for: quantity committed, quantity in stock, and quantity ordered. Okay. Now I can go back to the report side and start to build my report. So the first thing I notice is I've got a new dimension I can pull data from called warehouse stock in warehouse. So those are the three quantities I was looking for. So I'm interested in quantity in stock, which is my on hand, quantity committed, which is what's been reserved or might be in an existing sales order, and how much quantity I've ordered. So I've got these three. So in terms of order, I would like to have the quantity in stock first, which is my on hand, what I've ordered, and what that has been committed. So I have this data. I want to see the table. So just click on the table in terms of its visualization, and just going to pull it by the bottom right so that I can see more within the page. Now what I'm not seeing is the items. So I'd like to go into items right here, and I do want to see this data by item name. So just highlight item name, and I see the breakdown of it by item name. Now the item name should be on the very left panel because I want to see item name against all the measures. So all I need to do is just drag that to the top like this. Okay. Now I need a couple of formulas. So for example, I do need to have a quantities available, and that is a formula that takes the quantity in stock plus what's ordered minus what's committed. So let's do that. Where do I store my measure? I want to have it easily found, so I'll make sure I store it in the stock in warehouse table. So just expanding that, I just have to do a right click and say new measure. It's working on it. And I have the option to create a new measure right here. So again, my formula is I need to first sum up the data because Power BI does require a sum, especially on a measure, for it to come up correctly. So it's going to be a sum of open parentheses, and that would be my quantity in stock. So just keyword search, say quantity in stock, right? Now then, what I have to do is I have to say this, I'm just closing the brackets there, plus whatever I've already ordered. So let's go into sum again. We look into keyword search, quantity ordered. That's another one. Close the parentheses. And this time minus sum of my quantity committed. That will be my availability, and close that. And this measure will be named available quantity. Okay, once ready, it automatically would create that measure for us. Okay. Now on the right, you'll see here that that available quantity has now been created. What I need to do is just check on it, and it should bring that into my report right here. Now I want to do another one. I want to take the available quantity and divide it by the quantity on hand so I know how much of that is available from a ratio and a percentage point of view. Okay. So I'm going to do a right click against the stock in warehouse again. Then this time I'm going to create another measure. Now, if I want to use an existing measure, I don't have to put a sum against it. So this formula is written as the available quantity. So this will be just available quantity like that, divided by the on hand. Now the on hand being a natural value that comes out of the tables, I still have to put that sum. So this will be sum, and then that is quantity. So that will be the quantity in stock as the on hand. And just want to close that parentheses right there. Okay. Now once that's done, I should have a ratio that shows me the percentage or the ratio of quantity, available quantity divided by the quantity in stock. I forgot to name this measure because measure is too generic a term. This is really available on hand. Okay, as simple as it can be, and just name that. It will work on it and allow me to just click on that to bring that into the system. So now I can see there are a couple of different ratios. I may want to change that to percentages later on, but right now I'm quite happy with this formula at this point. Now in terms of my available on hand, I do want to see, just put a little conditional formatting on that so that I know which are the ones that are, above a certain level or below a certain level. In fact, I can do that for the available quantity as well. So depending on which column I want to do that for. Now on the right side, you see the values here. These 5 columns are these 5 values. So let's say I wanted to do it on, say, available quantity, right? Just I can just do a right click on it, conditional formatting, and I said I want to do maybe the red, yellow, greens. So I want to use icons. Okay, so I've got the red, yellow, greens right here. If it's greater than a certain percent, it's red. If it's greater than or equal to 33, it's yellow and green. So just to save time, I'm just going to click on OK. Let's see what results I get. Okay, so here you can see against the available quantity, it looks at all the different data in order to determine, what is high, what is low, and what is in between the two. Okay, so that's what I can see there. I'll do the same for available on hand, just to take a look at an indicator that tells me straight away based on color what is high, what is low, and what's in between. So I'll go into the icons. Let's choose a different style. Just click on OK. So here you see a certain value as well. All of that seems to be going up. So because we never really set up the rules very, very tightly, but just to give you an idea, this is how we would set up some conditional formatting. Of course, the rules that come into play, we can always adjust them by doing a right click and going in there to adjust those rules here. So you can specify certain rules, if it's greater than, less than, what your conditions are for it to show certain styles. Okay. But just a quick look at this. This is just what I want to see in terms of not so much these conditional formatting, which is just a little feature, but more importantly, I do want to see, in terms of the what's the available quantity, how to set up a measure, a calculated measure, and also how to set up a ratio using both an existing field and a measure that we've created before, which is that available quantity right there. So this is just a small little exercise on Power BI. There's a lot of things that can be done. We can start to add lots of other content, on the sides of this report. But that is just a small snippet of what we're covering today. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, learning about metrics and understanding how data works and how the metrics apply to those data. And in this last part, just to show how easy it is just to create a little piece of content, and that little piece happens to be on another page, but we could easily incorporate it on one of these existing Power BI pieces if we wanted to as well. Right? So thank you. I'm going to move on to the conclusion of my presentation. We've just completed the software spotlight. So right now we are moving on to the next part of this presentation. So what if you do not have Power BI? It doesn't matter. You can still use Zap Data Hub and our analytics design. So this is an example of a Zap dashboard. It's designed through the same interface that I showed before, where I was showing the ERP model. That ERP model which I showed, the data source, the pipelines, the relationships, this is the exact same platform. It's drag and drop and all done via web authoring and web design. This is an example of a Zap report. You will see a few different columns with banded colors, and these are what we call slicers. Slicers are like filters within Excel or drop downs in other applications, which allow you to choose between companies and storage locations, and the data will change accordingly. Now, all the content that we had shown in Power BI is also available within the Zap Visuals. And the key takeaways for this presentation really is to understand the theory behind the metrics. By now, we will be very familiar with what inventory turn is, what days of supply, and inventory days are. We also know the inventory contents that come with Power BI. As part of my presentation, I did show some of the formulas that get computed within Power BI. And we understand how Zap Data Hub feeds data into Power BI. Remember the part where we were adding the stock in warehouse table into the schema of Power BI? That comes from Zap Data Hub. And we like to consider the ready-made Zap Data Hub platform and or app source examples like Power BI, because all of that is already pre-built for us. It has all the hooks into various subject areas, not just inventory, but also sales and finance and other pieces. So it makes our life a lot easier without having to reinvent the wheel. And with that, let's move on to questions and answers. Please feel free to ask any questions within the little window of the chat application.